Unit 6, Lesson 2, Natural Selection. Last lesson, we talked about Charles Darwin. He was the father of evolution. And the reason why he's the father of evolution, regardless of the fact that there were other scientists and naturalists that had also thought of that concept, is he was the first to explain it. And how he tried to explain it is he came up with this understanding of natural selection, where rather than humans selecting what we want to see in an environment, nature is doing the selecting. And we call this, again, natural selection. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions of evolution is that evolution can occur individually, and that's not true. Evolution actually occurs at the population level, not individually. So when we say that there are mutations does not mean that the population is going to evolve. For mutations to lead to that, we would have to see a mutation that not only occurred, but was beneficial, then was passed down, and then eventually ended up in the population. So again, evolution occurs at the population level and not individually. You could definitely expect to see that on your quiz and test. When we're talking about natural selection, we need to understand that there are some things, components, these forces that must be present in the situation or the scenario for natural selection to actually occur. So let's talk about them. The first one is something called the struggle for existence. And this states that organisms produce more offspring than the environment can support, that there's competition for the limited resources. What we're really talking about is the environment. There are components of the environment that make it hard for certain variations in a population to survive. Not all organisms are going to be able to equally survive. Some will be better adapted, others not. But it's based off of, again, the environment and what is causing that problem. And this can be due to a lack of food, it could be due to a lack of habitat, a lack of mates, but something is causing that issue. It could be more predators in an area. Now, when we look at this picture of butterflies, we see a population of butterflies. We see lots of variations. They're not all the same color. And there could be something about the environment that could cause one of them to struggle more. Maybe one of them is not as camouflaged as some of the others. Maybe there's a predator that really likes the taste of a light pink butterfly over a light blue butterfly. Whatever that situation is, there is a struggle for these organisms to be able to make it, not only to be born, but then also to survive to adulthood and be able to reproduce to then pass along those genes. That is the struggle for existence. Next is variation and adaptation. When we talk about variation and adaptation, not only do we need a population, but that population has to have differences in it. If the population is all exactly cookie cutter the same, then we will not see any changes to the population because the nature doesn't have any variations to select over the other. And what we see with this is that offspring in any generation will be slightly different from one another in their traits. This could be color, size, shape, and that all of these have to be inheritable. So it can't be something as simple as in humans. It can't be something like, oh, I have a tattoo, or, oh, I'm able to speak 5 languages. Those are not inheritable. What is inheritable are things that are embedded in your DNA. So these variations have to be embedded in the DNA to then be passed down to offspring. Now let's talk about the adaptation component of variation adaptation. So great, you have some changes, you have some differences, some variations in the population. If one of those variations makes an organism more successful, that is going to be, again, an adaptation. An adaptation is any heritable characteristic that increases an organism's ability to survive and reproduce in its environment. Maybe it's able to run faster. Maybe it lays more eggs. Maybe it has a better color that allows it to camouflage. Maybe it has more developed muscles where it's able to leap or jump higher. Maybe it has a longer neck. Maybe it, again, has an immunity to a certain type of disease that a lot of other organisms aren't. Whatever that is, the variation not only has to be present in the population, but there has to be something about it that, again, allows it to be an adaptation. When we're dealing with our butterflies, again, you have all this variation. But maybe in the situation, there is a environment that is going to allow the blue butterflies, or maybe to better camouflage, which would mean if you're a predator, are you going to hunt down the food sources that are harder to spot or easier to spot? Chances are you're going to go for the easy meal. So that means that the ones that are less camouflaged are going to be easier to spot. They're going to be the first ones that are going to be eaten. Less likely are going to be the ones that are better camouflaged. So maybe being blue in a certain environment might be a better adaptation. 3, survival of the fittest. Now, when we talk about fittest, we're not talking about like the physical strength or how strong or how fast. We're actually talking in biological fitness. We're talking about how well an organism survives and reproduces. So if an organism has better or the best fitness, it survives the longest and reproduces the most. So that means that there's more of its genes passed down to the offspring. And with this, we have to understand that if there is a more fit organism, there's also less fit. So there are organisms that don't survive as long or don't reproduce as much. So when we think of this and put together all of the other components of natural selection, we have this, we're going to go back to our scenario of butterflies, that if we have an environment, in this case, this environment is a pink tree, and we look at the variations, is there a variation between the more blue to the more pink or red that is better fit, will survive longer in this environment? Well, we can understand by looking at that the lighter pink and the red variations are going to blend in better with the pink tree environment than the blue, which means that the predator, this bird that's over here to the left, is going to probably spot and catch and eat the blue butterflies more frequently than they're probably going to see and spot the red or pink ones. And what we're going to see is over time, we'll see a population shift where we see more pink or red butterflies over the blue. Now, with this, let's actually do a definition of what natural selection actually is. It is a process by which organisms in nature with variations most suited to their local environment survive and leave more offspring. Again, we need those components of struggle for existence, variation and adaptation, and lastly, survival of the fittest to be in play for natural selection to actually occur. Now, we have some practice problems. You have 2. We're going to do the first one together. So there are 2 types of worms that eat at night, nocturnal, and worms that eat during the day, diurnal. The birds eat during the day and seem to be eating only the diurnal worms. The nocturnal worms are in their burrows during this time. Each spring, when the worms reproduce, they have about 500 babies, but only 100 of these 500 ever become old enough to reproduce. So our goal in this practice is to select what part of this scenario fits each of the different forces of natural selection. So when we talk about struggle for existence, that means that not all are going to survive. And so you're going to pick the sentence where that's pretty much what it's saying. Not all are going to survive and why that's happening. In this case, that's the only 100 worms will survive from the 500 born. Now, with variation and adaptation, remember variation is the differences. So what is different about these populations of worms? What are your options? And in this case, you have diurnal worms and nocturnal worms, and one of those variations is going to be better adapted. So this is, again, the variation and adaptation part of the scenario. Now, survival of the fittest is, of those variations, which one is actually the survivor? In this case, the nocturnal worms are going to survive and reproduce. And what we're going to see over time in this population, because more nocturnal worms are surviving, reproducing, and passing along those genes, we're going to see that the population of worms are going to become more nocturnal over time. Although there might be some diurnal worms still there, there's going to definitely be a much more populated shift towards nocturnal variation. Now, there's another practice problem. You're going to pause right now, and then you're going to complete that and then continue on with your notes. Now, from generation to generation, populations continue to change as they become better adapted or as their environment changes. So, when we see natural selection in play, we see it happening over time. And again, this makes sense because evolution occurs on populations, not on individuals. So, it takes time for a variation or a change to occur over a group of individuals, such as a population. There are three types of natural selection that we're going to go over. Before we start talking about those types, we need to understand where are we starting. And for the most part, most populations have this sort of spread of variation. Again, it fits a bell curve where the moderate or medium variation typically is the higher one for the most part in most populations. And again, this is going to produce a wide range of physical traits produced, and then the average is going to be in the middle. This could be on height, skin color, any kind of variation that you can imagine. Now, the first type of natural selection is directional selection, which means that the selection by nature is shifting in one direction of a variation. What that looks like is we start out with our original population, and there's one of the extremes is selected against. It could be the one that's closest to the axis or the one that's away. It doesn't really matter. But what's going to end up happening is it's going to cause the original population to shift in one direction. Hence why it's called directional selection. So you have this old population with this new population shift. This is another image that I would like for you to make sure that you recognize. And again, the 4 is again being chosen for one extreme. Only one extreme. And that means that the other extreme is not doing so well. So we're going to, again, define directional selection as individuals at one end of the curve that have a higher fitness than individuals at another end of the curve. Over time, the favored extreme will become more common. An example of this would be long tails on lizards. A long tail on lizard might give the impression to a bird or a predator that that's a snake, and snakes are viewed as more dangerous to hunt than maybe a lizard would be. And so it scares away the predators rather than attracting them. So what we see over time is that the longer tailed lizards are eaten less than the shorter tailed ones. So that means that we see a decrease in shorter-tailed lizards because they're eaten more, and an increase for the other extreme of the long-tailed lizard. Now, the second type is called stabilizing selection. Stabilizing selection, again, we're starting to see that original curve of bell curve that we have, but what happens with stabilizing is that both extremes are selected against. Too short, too long, a lighter color, a darker color, but the moderate is doing very well. So what we see is it stabilizes in the middle, hence why it's called stabilizing selection. And again, this has the 4 for moderate traits, the moderate ones, the medium ones, they're the ones that are doing well in this environment. The extremes on either end, not doing well. So we see a dramatic decrease in those. Again, stabilizing selection, this is individuals near the center of the curve have higher fitness than individuals at the other end of the curve. Over time, the average states become more common. An example of this would be short tails mess up a cat's balance versus a long tails drag on the ground. So a cat having a medium or average length tail makes them less likely to have it drag on the ground, which would slow them down, but also not mess up their balance. So we would see, again, more of that moderate size or length of tail that they're doing better. The last type of natural selection is disruptive selection. And what we're seeing with disruptive selection is we start again with our normal population, but what happens is that rather than the moderate doing well, the moderate is not doing well. Something in the environment makes it either not be able to camouflage well, or maybe it's just not better adapted in that environment currently. But what happens is the extremes, though, are doing well. So we see this almost divide. So I want you to think disruptive divide. in the population. It's going to look again like this. And in this case, both extremes are doing very well in the environment, while the medium or average or moderate trait is not doing well. And we can define this as, again, individuals at the upper and lower ends, the extreme ends of the curve, have a higher fitness than those that are in the middle. And this is going to cause a split within the species. An example of this might be short tails help keep predators from catching you on the ground. So not needing you don't have a tail that is going to be easy to, again, grab. But long tails help with balance in trees so that you can leap further and be more safe. So these are, again, two very different sort of extremes of length of tail. Too short is really good, but also longer is also really good. Medium, you don't really get it both. It's not long enough to help you with balance, but it's also long enough to make you more likely to get caught by predators. Now let's practice this one together. You have some additional ones that you're going to do on your own. Female robins can lay anywhere from 1 to 10 eggs. Laying too few eggs runs the risk of them all getting eaten, and laying too many eggs results in underfed chicks. Most robins will lay 4 to 5 eggs. So in this case, we need to go on and label our axis of number of individuals over here on the y-axis, the x-axis, 0 to 10 eggs. And in this scenario, having too few is not good. Having too many is not good. Having the average sort of 4 to 5 is best. And that's going to help us redraw our graph. Now, when we redraw this graph, think about what type this best matches. Directional, stabilizing, or disruptive. In this case, it's stabilizing selection because it's become more and more stable from what it already was. Right, you have the other practice problems to complete. Make sure that you do those and bring your questions if you have any. Have a great day.